Have you ever noticed how, without anything dramatic happening, life suddenly feels different? The same room, the same phone, the same people, yet something inside you shifts. Moments like that often get dismissed as mood changes, overthinking, or imagination. But psychology, neuroscience, and perception research suggest something deeper is happening. This isn't about science fiction. It's about how the human brain quietly constructs multiple versions of reality and how, without realizing it, you move between them. Tonight, we'll explore why it can feel like you've entered a parallel reality, why most people never notice when it happens, and how awareness alone can gently guide you into a calmer, clearer version of your life. Take a breath. You don't need to do anything. Just listen. Your brain does not experience the world as it is. It receives incomplete signals, light, sound, sensation, and fills in the gaps using memory, expectation, and emotion. Two people can live the same day in the same place and experience entirely different realities. Psychologists call this predictive processing. Your brain predicts what will happen next and edits reality to match those predictions. This means reality isn't fixed, it's interpreted. And every interpretation creates a slightly different internal world. This is the first quiet doorway into what feels like a parallel reality. Think about the last time you walked into a familiar room and it felt completely different. Nothing had changed physically. The furniture was in the same place. The walls were the same color. The lighting hadn't shifted, but something felt altered. That sensation isn't random. It's your brain selecting a different interpretive framework, a different lens through which to process the same raw sensory data. This happens constantly, mostly beneath conscious awareness. Your nervous system is always making subtle adjustments, recalibrating based on your internal state, your recent experiences, your expectations about what comes next. The construction of reality begins long before conscious awareness. Your sensory organs are filtering millions of data points every second, and your brain must decide which ones matter. This decision isn't neutral. It's shaped by survival needs, emotional states, past experiences, and current goals. What you notice and what you ignore determines your entire perceptual field. Two people standing side by side can witness the same event and come away with completely different accounts, not because one is lying, but because they literally perceived different things. Inside your mind are many versions of you. There is the you who feels confident, the you who feels cautious, the you who feels tired, the you who feels hopeful. Each version notices different details. Each version reacts differently to the same event. When one version becomes dominant, your entire experience of life changes. The world didn't change. You did. This shift often feels sudden, like crossing into a different reality, but it's really a change in which internal version is guiding your attention. Consider how you experience a conversation when you're feeling secure versus when you're feeling defensive. The other person's words might be identical, but your interpretation transforms completely. In one state, you hear curiosity. In another state, you hear criticism. Same words, different reality. This isn't about being wrong or right. It's about recognizing that your internal state literally constructs what you perceive as objective truth. The version of you that's dominant in any given moment determines which reality you inhabit. These versions aren't personalities in the clinical sense. They're more like attentional patterns, habitual ways of filtering and organizing experience. Think of them as different radio frequencies your consciousness can tune into. Each frequency picks up different signals from the same environment. When you shift frequencies, it genuinely feels like you've entered a different world, because in a very real sense, you have. Your perceptual world has changed, even though the physical world remains constant. Shifts between these versions can happen instantly or gradually. Sometimes a single word, a particular smell, a specific memory can flip you from one state to another in seconds. Other times, the transition is so slow you don't notice until you're already there. You wake up one day and realize you've been inhabiting a different internal landscape for weeks, and you can't quite pinpoint when the change occurred. Both types of shifts are normal. Both reveal the fluid nature of constructed reality. Have you ever woken up and felt like the day was slightly wrong? Nothing obvious, just off. Your brain had already selected a different internal lens. When that happens, familiar places feel unfamiliar. Sounds feel sharper. Time feels slower or faster. This isn't malfunction, it's recalibration. Your mind testing a different way of experiencing reality. These off days are fascinating when you stop resisting them and start observing them. Your brain is essentially running diagnostics, experimenting with different interpretive models to see which one fits best with current conditions. Sometimes this happens because of subtle physiological changes, hormonal fluctuations, sleep quality, nutrition. Other times it's psychological, a response to unprocessed emotions or unresolved tensions from previous days. The sensation of wrongness isn't the problem. It's information. It's your system telling you that the usual framework isn't quite working right now. Most people fight these days. They try to force themselves back into the familiar feeling, to push through the strangeness. But that resistance often intensifies the discomfort. What if instead you simply acknowledged it? What if you said, internally, today feels different and that's okay? I don't need to understand why. I can move through this day with curiosity instead of judgment. That simple shift in relationship to the experience often dissolves much of the distress. The off feeling also reveals something profound about the constructed nature of normalcy. We tend to think of our baseline state as reality and deviations from it as distortions. But what if there is no baseline? What if every state is equally constructed, equally valid as an interpretation of the raw data streaming into your senses? The feeling of things being right or wrong is itself just another layer of interpretation, another prediction your brain is making about how things should feel. Your brain is constantly engaged in what neuroscientists call active inference. It's not passively receiving information from the world. It's actively generating hypotheses about what's out there and then checking those hypotheses against incoming sensory data. When there's a match, you experience confirmation. When there's a mismatch, you experience surprise or confusion. But here's the crucial part. Your brain often adjusts the sensory data to fit the hypothesis rather than adjusting the hypothesis to fit the data. This is why expectations are so powerful. They literally shape what you perceive. This predictive mechanism evolved for good reasons. In a dangerous ancestral environment, the organism that could predict where the predator would appear next had a survival advantage over the organism that simply reacted to what was already visible. Your ancestors who were best at predictive processing survived and reproduced. You inherited their tendency to see what they expect to see rather than what's actually there. This served them well in physical survival. But in the modern world, where threats are often psychological rather than physical, this same mechanism can create suffering. When you expect criticism, you hear criticism even in neutral comments. When you expect rejection, you see rejection even in ordinary distance. When you expect failure, you interpret setbacks as confirmations of your inadequacy. The prediction becomes self-fulfilling not because it was accurate, but because it shaped your perception and therefore your response. You're living in a parallel reality constructed by expectation, and that reality feels completely real, completely objective, even though it's largely generated from within. Most people drift between mental realities unconsciously, but awareness changes everything. The moment you notice my perception feels different right now, you step out of automatic mode. That moment of noticing creates choice. You can soften your attention, slow your breathing, allow the shift instead of resisting it, and often the experience becomes calmer instead of unsettling. This is where real power emerges. Not the power to control reality, but the power to relate to it differently. When you catch yourself in the act of constructing experience, you suddenly have flexibility. You're no longer completely identified with any single version of yourself or any single interpretation of events. You can observe the process itself. You can watch your mind select certain details to focus on while ignoring others. You can notice the emotional tone coloring your perceptions. And in that noticing, you gain a kind of freedom. Awareness doesn't mean you can simply choose to feel differently in any given moment. Emotions and perceptions have momentum. They're influenced by complex factors beyond conscious control. But awareness does mean you can stop treating your current state as the whole truth. You can recognize it as one possibility among many. And that recognition alone often loosens the grip of difficult states. When you know that this too shall pass, that your experience will shift again, the present moment becomes more bearable. There's also something paradoxical here. The more you try to force a shift in perception, the more rigid your current state often becomes. But when you simply observe without trying to change anything, shifts happen naturally. It's like trying to fall asleep. The harder you try, the more elusive sleep becomes. But when you stop trying and just rest, sleep often arrives on its own. Perceptual shifts work similarly. They happen more easily when you're not grasping for them. The practice of observation itself is transformative. When you watch your thoughts without getting caught in them, when you notice your emotions without being overwhelmed by them, when you witness your perceptions without assuming they're absolutely true, you're developing what psychologists call metacognition. You're thinking about your thinking. You're aware of being aware. And this meta level creates distance, creates space, creates freedom. This space is where choice lives. Between the stimulus and your response is a gap, and in that gap you can decide how to proceed. This gap exists for everyone, but most people never notice it. They go directly from stimulus to habitual response without any conscious mediation. But when you train attention through practices like meditation or mindful awareness, the gap becomes more apparent, more accessible. You start catching yourself before you react. You start recognizing patterns before they fully activate. You start having real choice about which version of yourself shows up. Visualization isn't magic, it's rehearsal. When you imagine a calmer, clearer version of yourself, your brain begins activating the same networks used in real experience. Over time, that version becomes easier to access. Not because reality changed, but because your brain learned a new default. This is how people say life feels different now. They didn't leave their world. They entered a new internal one. Neuroscience here is straightforward. Your brain doesn't distinguish sharply between imagined and actual experience, especially when the imagining is vivid and emotionally engaged. When you repeatedly visualize yourself responding calmly to stress, your brain strengthens the neural pathways associated with calm responses. You're literally building new infrastructure in your mind. And because perception is constructed from these neural patterns, changing the patterns changes what you perceive and how you respond. This isn't positive thinking in the superficial sense. It's not about pretending everything is fine or suppressing difficult emotions. It's about expanding your repertoire of possible responses. When you only have one way of reacting to stress, you're trapped. But when you've practiced multiple responses, even just in imagination, you have options. And options create a different kind of reality, one where you're not helplessly buffeted by circumstances, but actively participating in how you experience them. The practice itself can be simple. A few minutes each day, sitting quietly, bringing to mind a version of yourself that embodies qualities you want to access more readily. Maybe it's patience. Maybe it's curiosity. Maybe it's lightness. You don't strain to become this version. You simply spend time with it, feeling what it would feel like to inhabit that state. Notice where in your body you sense these qualities. Notice how your breathing changes. Notice how your thoughts slow or quicken. You're not forcing anything. You're familiarizing yourself with a different frequency. Over weeks and months, something subtle happens. You start noticing moments when you spontaneously access these states without trying. A situation that would have triggered anxiety instead triggers curiosity. A comment that would have felt like criticism instead feels neutral. You haven't changed the external world, but you've changed your internal landscape, and that changes everything about how you move through life. Athletes use visualization extensively. They mentally rehearse their performance, imagining every detail, every movement, every sensation. This mental practice produces measurable improvements in actual performance. The brain is training even when the body is still. The same principle applies to emotional and perceptual states. When you mentally rehearse calm, or confidence, or compassion, you're training those circuits, making them more available when you need them. But there's a key element that makes visualization effective. It needs to be embodied. You can't just think about being calm. You need to feel it in your body. Notice where calm lives in your chest, your shoulders, your belly. Feel the quality of breath that accompanies calm. Sense the softness in your face, the ease in your muscles. The more sensory detail you include, the more real it becomes to your brain, and the more effectively you're training the new pattern. The most powerful shifts are subtle. No dramatic event, no announcement. Just one day realizing you respond differently. You feel steadier. You notice beauty more easily. That's when you understand the parallel reality was never somewhere else. It was always within perception. This realization can be disorienting at first. If reality is this fluid, this dependent on internal states, what can you trust? Where is solid ground? But the disorientation eventually gives way to something lighter. You realize you've been carrying an unnecessary burden, the belief that you had to figure out the one true reality, the one correct way to see things. When you release that burden, life becomes more playful, more experimental. You can try on different perspectives, the way you might try on different clothes, seeing which ones fit the moment, which ones serve your well-being and the well-being of others. There's also a deepening compassion that comes with this understanding. When you recognize how much your own reality is constructed, you start seeing that everyone else is living in their own constructed reality too. The person who frustrates you isn't seeing what you see. They're responding to an entirely different set of predictions and interpretations. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it does create space for understanding. You stop taking things so personally because you realize most of what people do is about their internal reality, not about you. This shift in perspective can transform relationships. Instead of arguing about who's right, you can get curious about how the other person is constructing their experience. What are they noticing that you're not? What predictions are they making? What past experiences are shaping their interpretations? These questions open conversations instead of closing them. They create connection instead of division. When conflict arises, it's often because two people are living in different realities, and each is insisting theirs is the only valid one. But when both people can acknowledge the constructed nature of perception, there's room for negotiation, for exploring together, for finding a shared reality that works for both. This doesn't mean abandoning your own perspective. It means holding it lightly enough that you can genuinely consider another's. Think about memory for a moment. You probably believe your memories are recordings of what actually happened. But research shows memory is reconstructive. Every time you recall something, you're rebuilding it from fragments, and those fragments are influenced by your current state, your current beliefs, your current emotions. This means your past is constantly changing, not because events themselves change, but because your relationship to them does. The story you tell about your life shifts, depending on which version of you is telling it. This has profound implications. It means you're not stuck with the past as you've understood it. You can revisit old experiences and discover new meanings, new possibilities. That difficult childhood memory might carry different weight when viewed from a place of compassion rather than shame. That failure might look like a necessary learning experience rather than evidence of inadequacy. The facts don't change, but the reality, the lived significance of those facts, absolutely can. Some people find this unsettling. If the past is this fluid, how can you build a coherent sense of self? But perhaps coherence is overrated. Perhaps the self is meant to be fluid, responsive, capable of growth and change. The rigid self, the one that insists on being the same across all situations and all time, is actually the source of tremendous suffering. It's what keeps you locked into old patterns, old stories, old limitations. What if you could hold your identity more lightly? What if you could be multiple things, multiple versions, without needing them all to fit into one consistent narrative? This doesn't mean losing yourself. It means expanding beyond the narrow definitions you've been carrying. It means recognizing that you contain multitudes, and that's not a problem to solve but a richness to appreciate. The poet Walt Whitman wrote, "Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes." This isn't confusion or inconsistency. It's the natural state of a complex human being. You can be confident in one context and insecure in another. You can be generous with some people and guarded with others. You can hold conflicting beliefs and feelings simultaneously. This isn't weakness. It's the reality of being human. Attention is the key mechanism in all of this. Where you place your attention literally shapes what becomes real for you. This isn't metaphorical. Attention determines which neural patterns activate, which memories surface, which possibilities you notice. Two people in the same room with different attentional patterns are inhabiting genuinely different realities. One notices threat. Another notices opportunity. One sees scarcity. Another sees abundance. Same room, different worlds. You can train attention. It's not easy, but it's possible. Meditation is essentially attention training. You practice noticing where your mind goes and gently redirecting it. Over time, you develop more choice about where attention lands and how long it stays there. This doesn't mean you can control your thoughts completely. Thoughts arise on their own, but you can influence which ones you feed with attention and which ones you let pass. This attentional flexibility is what allows you to shift between realities. When you notice you're stuck in an anxious reality, you can redirect attention towards something that grounds you. A physical sensation, a sound, a memory of safety. This isn't denial. The anxiety doesn't disappear immediately, but you're no longer giving it your full attention, and without that attention, it has less power to dominate your experience. The breath is always available as an anchor. It's happening right now, in this moment, regardless of what you're thinking or feeling. When you bring attention to breathing, you're bringing yourself back to the present, back to the one thing that's actually happening rather than the many things you're imagining might happen. This simple practice can interrupt the cascade of anxious predictions and give you access to a different reality, one that's quieter, more spacious. Breathing has a direct relationship with your nervous system. Slow, deep breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which governs rest and relaxation. Rapid, shallow breathing activates the sympathetic nervous system, which governs fight or flight. By consciously slowing your breath, you're sending a signal to your brain that you're safe. And when your brain receives this signal, it begins to shift out of threat mode. The reality of danger starts to dissolve, replaced by the reality of safety. This isn't just psychological, it's physiological. Your heart rate slows, your blood pressure decreases, stress hormones reduce, muscles relax. These bodily changes then feed back into your perception, creating a positive cycle. You feel calmer because your body is calmer, and your body becomes calmer because you feel calmer. The loop can spiral in either direction, toward anxiety or toward peace, depending on where you place your attention. Language shapes reality too. The words you use to describe your experience aren't neutral labels. They're active ingredients in how you feel. When you say, "I am anxious," you're identifying with anxiety, making it central to who you are in that moment. When you say, "I notice anxiety," present, you're creating a bit of distance, recognizing anxiety as something you're experiencing, but not something you are. That subtle shift in language can shift your entire relationship to the feeling. This isn't about toxic positivity or pretending difficult emotions don't exist. It's about precision. Being precise with language gives you more options. Instead of "I'm a failure," you might say, "I attempted something and it didn't work out." Instead of "This is unbearable," you might say, "This is very difficult right now." The second version in each case is more accurate and less totalizing. It leaves room for other possibilities. Language also creates expectations that then shape perception. If you label someone as difficult, you'll notice all the ways they're difficult and miss the moments when they're cooperative. If you label yourself as bad at math, you'll interpret every struggle as confirmation of this identity rather than as a normal part of learning. The labels you apply become the lens through which you see, and that lens determines your reality. You can practice noticing the language you use, both in speaking and in thinking. When you catch yourself using totalizing words like always, never, everyone, nobody, you can pause and ask if that's actually true. Usually it's not. Usually it's an exaggeration born of emotion. When you replace the exaggeration with something more accurate, you often feel less overwhelmed. The problem becomes more manageable when it's not everything, everywhere, all the time. Cultural narratives also construct reality in ways we rarely question. You inherit stories about how life works, what matters, what success looks like, what you should want. These stories shape your predictions, your expectations, your interpretations. And most people never examine them. They live inside cultural narratives as if they were objective truth rather than one possible interpretation among many. When you start questioning these inherited narratives, you open up new realities. Maybe success doesn't have to look like what you were taught. Maybe happiness doesn't require what you thought it did. Maybe your worth isn't determined by productivity or achievement or external validation. These aren't just philosophical questions. They have immediate practical effects on how you experience daily life. When you release a narrative that was creating suffering, you literally enter a different reality. Consider the narrative about constant productivity and busyness. Many people have internalized the belief that they should always be doing something useful, that rest is lazy, that downtime is wasted time. This creates a reality of perpetual stress and guilt. You can't relax because you feel like you should be working. You can't work peacefully because you're exhausted. But this narrative isn't universal. It's culturally specific. Other cultures have different relationships with time, with rest, with productivity. When you recognize this, you can choose differently. You can create a personal narrative that includes rest as essential rather than indulgent. The people around you are also creating reality through their expectations and projections. Family members see you in certain ways. Friends have images of who you are, and these images exert subtle pressure. You might find yourself performing a version of yourself that matches their expectations, even when that version doesn't fit who you're becoming. This is where parallel realities can diverge sharply. The reality you inhabit with one group of people might be completely different from the reality you inhabit with another. This isn't being fake. It's recognizing that self is relational. You're not the same person with your parents as you are with your friends, with your colleagues, with strangers. Different relationships draw out different aspects of who you are. The question is whether you're consciously choosing which aspects to emphasize or whether you're unconsciously conforming to others' expectations. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is disappoint someone's image of you. When you're living to meet others' expectations rather than your own values, you're inhabiting their reality instead of yours. Breaking free requires courage. It requires accepting that some people might not like who you're becoming, but the alternative is abandoning yourself, and that cost is too high. Sometimes entering a parallel reality means changing your environment, not because the environment is the problem, but because it's so saturated with familiar cues that it keeps triggering the same internal state. A new place, new people, new routines can interrupt old patterns and make new ones possible. This is why travel can feel so transformative. You're not just seeing new sights, you're accessing new versions of yourself that couldn't emerge in the old context. But you don't always need to physically move. Sometimes you can create a parallel reality right where you are by changing small rituals. Take a different route to work. Sit in a different chair. Eat breakfast at a different time. These tiny changes disrupt automaticity and create small openings for new perceptions, new responses. You're essentially telling your brain that today is not just a repeat of yesterday, and that simple message can shift everything. Environmental cues are powerful because they're processed automatically. You don't consciously decide to feel a certain way when you enter a certain room. The association happens beneath awareness. But you can work with this. You can intentionally create environments that support the states you want to access. If you want to feel calm, you might create a space with soft lighting, comfortable seating, perhaps some plants or water sounds. Your brain will begin to associate this space with calm, making it easier to access that state when you're there. Time perception is another domain where parallel realities emerge. When you're anxious, time stretches. Minutes feel like hours. When you're engaged, time compresses. Hours feel like minutes. Same objective time, radically different subjective experience. And that subjective experience is your reality. You're not living in objective time. You're living in felt time, which is entirely dependent on your state. This is why presence is so powerful. When you're fully present, you're not living in the past or future. You're here now, and time has a different quality. It's fuller, richer, less rushed. The parallel reality of presence is available in any moment, but it requires letting go of the mental habit of being elsewhere, of constantly anticipating what's next or rehashing what happened before. Paradoxically, when you stop trying to escape the present moment, it often becomes more bearable. Much of suffering comes from resistance, from wanting things to be different than they are. When you relax that resistance, even just a little, you create space around difficult experiences. The experience is still there, but it's not consuming you completely. You're holding it in a larger awareness, and that changes its impact. Pain and suffering are not the same thing. Pain is the raw sensation, the difficult circumstance, the unavoidable challenge. Suffering is the mental layer you add to pain, the stories about how terrible it is, how it shouldn't be happening, how you can't bear it. Pain is often unavoidable. Suffering is optional. When you stop resisting pain, when you simply feel it without the narrative, suffering decreases even when pain remains. This doesn't mean you should passively accept harmful situations. It means you can respond to them more effectively when you're not overwhelmed by resistance. When you're present with what is, you can see clearly what needs to change and what needs to be accepted. That clarity is impossible when you're caught in stories about how things should be different. Emotions themselves create parallel realities. When you're in love, the world is beautiful. When you're grieving, it's gray. When you're angry, it's threatening. Same world, different emotional filter. And here's what's interesting. You can have emotions without being completely overtaken by them. You can notice anger is present without becoming angry, without letting anger dictate all your perceptions and responses. This creates yet another parallel reality, one where you're experiencing emotion, but also maintaining perspective. The practice of noting emotions as they arise, nomming them gently without judgment, is remarkably effective at creating this kind of space. That's frustration. That's sadness. That's excitement. You're not suppressing or amplifying. You're just acknowledging. And that acknowledgement allows the emotion to move through you more naturally instead of getting stuck or spiraling. Emotions are like weather patterns in the mind. They arise, they peak, they pass. When you understand this, you stop treating every emotional state as permanent or meaningful beyond its momentary presence. You can feel sad without concluding that life is meaningless. You can feel angry without believing the world is against you. You can feel anxious without assuming danger is imminent. The emotion is real, but the story it tells isn't necessarily true. Physical sensations anchor you in one reality or launch you into another. Tension in your shoulders might trigger thoughts about stress, which trigger more tension, creating a feedback loop that pulls you into an anxious reality. But if you notice the tension early and breathe into it, soften around it, you might interrupt that loop. The sensation is still there, but it's not generating the same cascade of thoughts and feelings. Your body is constantly giving you information about which reality you're inhabiting. Heart rate, muscle tension, breathing pattern, digestive sensations, all of these shift depending on your state. When you learn to read these bodily signals, you gain earlier warning about perceptual shifts. You can catch yourself entering an anxious reality before you're fully immersed in it, and that early awareness gives you more choice about whether to go there. Body awareness practices like yoga, Tai Chi, or simple body scans train you to notice these signals. You learn to feel the difference between tension and relaxation, between openness and contraction, between groundedness and dissociation. And with that somatic literacy comes greater ability to work with your state, to shift toward what serves you and away from what doesn't. The body also holds memory in ways that the thinking mind doesn't. Sometimes you'll feel an emotion or a sensation and have no idea why. There's no corresponding thought or situation that explains it. This is often somatic memory, the body remembering an old experience and recreating the associated feeling. When this happens, you don't need to figure out the story. You can simply be with the sensation, let it move through, let it release. The parallel reality of somatic awareness is one where healing happens beneath language, in the intelligent processing of the body itself. Sleep creates a natural boundary between realities. You go to sleep in one state and often wake in another. The problems that consumed you before sleep might feel insignificant in the morning. Or the reverse, something small becomes overwhelming after a night of anxious dreams. Sleep resets something, reorganizes mental contents in ways that aren't fully understood. But you can work with this. The way you approach sleep, the thoughts you go to bed with, influences what reality you wake into. A practice: before sleep, instead of reviewing all your worries or mistakes, bring to mind something you appreciate. Not forced gratitude, just gentle acknowledgement of something good. This simple practice can shift the neural patterns that remain active during sleep, and you're more likely to wake in a state that's receptive and open rather than defensive and contracted. Sleep itself is a form of parallel reality. During dreams, you inhabit worlds that feel completely real while you're in them. The logic of dreams is often absurd, impossible things happen without question, and yet you accept them fully. Only upon waking do you recognize the strangeness. This reveals something profound about consciousness. Your sense of reality is determined not by objective coherence, but by your brain's current model. Whatever model is active feels real, whether it's waking life or a dream. Some people report experiences where the boundary between waking and dreaming feels thin. Not in a concerning way, but in a way that highlights the constructed nature of both states. When you realize even waking reality is a kind of dream, a simulation your brain is running, it becomes less solid, less imprisoning. You're not trapped in one way of seeing. You're always already moving between interpretive frameworks. Dreams just make this more obvious. Lucid dreaming, the practice of becoming aware within a dream, offers a direct experience of how consciousness constructs reality. When you know you're dreaming, you can intentionally change elements of the dream. You can fly, transform objects, create new scenes. This demonstrates that the reality you're experiencing is generated by your mind rather than imposed from outside. And while waking life has more constraints than dreams, the principle is similar. You have more influence over your experienced reality than you typically recognize. Creativity is essentially the ability to access parallel realities. Artists, writers, innovators, they see possibilities others don't. Not because the possibilities aren't there, but because most people's attention is locked into habitual patterns. Creative people have learned to soften that lock, to entertain unusual connections, to ask what if instead of what is. You don't need to be an artist to cultivate this flexibility. You can practice it in small ways. When you have a problem, instead of immediately looking for the solution, you might spend time imagining multiple possible solutions, even absurd ones. This isn't about finding the right answer immediately. It's about training your mind to generate options, to see beyond the obvious. Brainstorming is a creativity technique that works precisely because it suspends judgment. You generate ideas without evaluating them. This allows unusual connections to emerge, possibilities that wouldn't surface if you were immediately critiquing each thought. The parallel reality of creative thinking is one where multiple truths can coexist, where contradictions are interesting rather than problematic, where not knowing is an invitation rather than a threat. Play is another doorway into parallel realities. When children play, they fully inhabit imagined worlds. A stick becomes a sword. A box becomes a spaceship. There's no self-consciousness about it. They're simply there in that reality. Adults often lose this capacity, becoming too serious, too literal. But you can reclaim it. You can approach life with more lightness, more willingness to imagine, to pretend, to try things without needing them to be perfect. This playful approach reduces the stakes of everyday interactions. When you're not treating everything as desperately serious, you have more freedom to experiment, to make mistakes, to learn. The parallel reality of playfulness is one where failure isn't devastating, where you can take risks because you know it's all part of the experiment. Humor operates in a similar space. When you can laugh at yourself, at situations, at the absurdity of human existence, you're stepping outside the intense seriousness that creates so much suffering. Humor creates perspective. It reminds you that there are multiple ways to interpret any situation, and some of them are lighter than others. This doesn't mean making light of genuine pain. It means not adding unnecessary weight to every difficulty. Relationships offer some of the most profound experiences of parallel realities. When you truly connect with another person, when there's genuine presence and openness, you enter a shared reality that doesn't exist outside that connection. It's co-created moment by moment through attention and responsiveness. And when the connection breaks, when presence is lost, you're suddenly in separate realities again, even though you're in the same physical space. This is why loneliness can feel so painful. You're surrounded by people, but you're in a private reality that no one else can access. The parallel reality of connection is what heals this. Not just being around others, but actually meeting them, being met by them, creating something together that neither of you could create alone. Listening is a skill that bridges realities. When you really listen, you're temporarily setting aside your own interpretive framework and trying to understand someone else's. You're asking, how does the world look from where you're standing? This doesn't mean you have to agree, but it means you're willing to acknowledge that multiple realities coexist and that yours isn't the only valid one. True listening is rare. Most people are waiting for their turn to speak, or planning their response, or comparing what they're hearing to their own experience. They're not actually receiving the other person. But when you listen without agenda, when you're genuinely curious about another's perspective, something shifts. the other person feels it. And they often open more, share more, become more themselves. You've created a reality of safety and acceptance that allows authenticity to emerge. The parallel reality you're seeking might not be somewhere you go. It might be something you allow. Most people are constantly doing, striving, pushing. They're trying to force life into a certain shape. But what if you stopped pushing? What if you simply allowed things to unfold? This isn't passivity. It's a different kind of engagement, one that's receptive rather than aggressive. Allowing doesn't mean you have no preferences or boundaries. It means you're not at war with reality. You're working with what is, rather than insisting it should be something else. And in that working with, you often find that obstacles dissolve more easily than when you're fighting them. Water flows around rocks. It doesn't try to move them through force. It finds the path of least resistance. This is the wisdom of allowing. In Taoist philosophy, this principle is called Wu Wei, action through non-action. It's not about being lazy or passive. It's about aligning with the natural flow of things rather than constantly swimming against the current. When you stop forcing, you become more sensitive to opportunities, to openings, to the subtle movements that indicate where energy wants to go. You work with life rather than against it. There's a reality that exists in the spaces between thoughts. When mental chatter quiets, even briefly, there's a spaciousness that emerges. It's not empty. It's full, but full of presence rather than content. This is the parallel reality meditation points toward. Not a different place, but a different quality of awareness. You don't need hours of meditation to touch this. Even a few conscious breaths can create a gap in the mental stream, a moment where you're not caught in narrative, not lost in prediction or memory. You're just here. And here is always simpler, quieter, more okay than the mind suggests. The mind loves complexity. It generates endless stories, problems, scenarios. But underneath all that complexity is something simple. You're alive. You're breathing. You're aware. When you come back to this simplicity, you enter a parallel reality where most of what seemed urgent and important reveals itself as optional, as constructed, as less solid than you thought. This isn't nihilism. It's not saying nothing matters. It's recognizing that you get to choose what matters, and that choosing differently creates a different life. The things that dominated your attention yesterday don't have to dominate it today. You can reorient toward what actually nurtures you, what actually aligns with who you're becoming. Becoming is the right word because you're never finished. There's no final version of you that you're trying to reach. You're always in process, always evolving. The parallel reality isn't a destination. It's a direction, a way of moving through life that's more conscious, more intentional, more alive. Every moment offers an opportunity to choose which reality you're cultivating, which version of yourself you're strengthening. Gratitude shifts reality instantly. Not performative gratitude, not forcing yourself to be thankful when you're suffering. But genuine appreciation, when it arises naturally, changes everything. It reorients attention toward what's working, what's beautiful, what's sufficient. And that reorientation is a perceptual shift into a different reality, one characterized by abundance rather than scarcity. You can cultivate gratitude gently, just noticing throughout the day small things that please you, the warmth of sunlight, the taste of water, a moment of quiet. You're not trying to manufacture positivity. You're simply acknowledging what's already present that's good, and that acknowledgement trains attention to notice more of it. The parallel reality of abundance is available regardless of external circumstances. It's not about having more. It's about recognizing what you have. Some of the most grateful people have very little materially. Some of the most miserable have everything materially. The difference is perception, is attention, is the reality they're constructing moment by moment. Research in positive psychology has shown that people who regularly practice gratitude report higher levels of well-being, better sleep, stronger relationships, and improved physical health. This isn't because gratitude magically changes their circumstances. It's because it changes their perception of their circumstances. They're inhabiting a different reality, one where good things are noticed and appreciated rather than overlooked in the search for what's wrong. Fear creates a parallel reality that's contracted, defensive, focused on threat. It's an evolutionary adaptive response in genuinely dangerous situations. But most modern fear is anticipatory, imagining terrible futures that never arrive. When you're in this reality, everything feels dangerous. You're interpreting neutral events as threatening. You're on high alert constantly, which is exhausting. The antidote isn't forcing yourself not to feel fear. It's recognizing when fear is driving perception and gently asking, is this actually dangerous right now in this moment? Often the answer is no. The danger is imagined, projected. And when you realize that, you can choose not to feed the fear with more attention. You can let it be present without letting it dominate. There's also a difference between fear and anxiety. Fear is a response to present danger. Anxiety is a response to imagined future danger. Most of what people experience as fear is actually anxiety. And anxiety, while uncomfortable, is just thoughts and sensations. It can't actually hurt you. When you stop being afraid of anxiety itself, it loses much of its power. The parallel reality of courage isn't one where fear is absent. It's one where fear is present but not in charge. You feel the fear and you act anyway. You acknowledge the risk and you proceed with care. This is accessible to anyone. It's not about being fearless. It's about being larger than your fear, about recognizing that you contain fear but are not defined by it. Comparison pulls you into a painful parallel reality. When you're constantly measuring yourself against others, you're in a reality of inadequacy. There's always someone more successful, more attractive, more accomplished. This reality is endless suffering because the comparison never ends. You can never be the best at everything. You can never be everyone else. But when you stop comparing, when you focus on your own path, your own growth, your own values, you enter a different reality. One where your worth isn't determined by how you stack up against others. One where you can celebrate others' success without feeling diminished. One where you're free to be exactly who you are. This shift isn't always easy. Cultural conditioning runs deep. We're taught to compete, to rank, to measure. Social media amplifies this tendency, presenting curated highlight reels that invite constant comparison. But you can question this conditioning. You can ask whether it serves you, whether it creates the life you actually want. And if the answer is no, you can begin, gently, to release it. The practice might be as simple as noticing when you're comparing and redirecting attention. Instead of focusing on how someone else's achievement makes you feel inadequate, you might ask what you can learn from them. Instead of envying someone's appearance, you might appreciate beauty without making it about your own perceived lack. Small shifts in how you relate to comparison gradually build a different reality. Forgiveness is a portal to a parallel reality. Not forgiveness that excuses harm or pretends it didn't happen, but forgiveness that releases you from the ongoing burden of resentment. Resentment keeps you tied to the past, reliving the injury over and over. It's a reality of perpetual victimhood. Forgiveness lets you put down that burden and move forward. This can take time. Deep hurts don't heal immediately. But the intention to forgive, the willingness to eventually release resentment, begins to shift things. You're no longer feeding the narrative of injury. You're opening to the possibility of a different story, one where you're not defined by what was done to you. Self-forgiveness might be even more important. The reality of self-judgment is crushing. You're living with a critic who never rests, who always finds you lacking. When you begin to forgive yourself, to extend the same compassion to yourself that you'd offer a friend, you enter a reality that's gentler, more spacious, more conducive to growth. Self-compassion research shows that people who treat themselves kindly in the face of failure or difficulty are actually more motivated to improve than those who are self-critical. The harsh inner critic doesn't produce better results. It produces shame, avoidance, and paralysis. Compassion creates safety, and from that safety, real growth becomes possible. Presence with others creates a shared parallel reality. When you're fully present with someone, not distracted, not planning what to say next, just there, listening, feeling, responding, you co-create something beautiful. A space of mutual recognition. This is one of the most profound human experiences, being truly seen and seeing another truly. Technology often interferes with this. Phones pull attention away. Notifications fragment presence. The parallel reality of constant partial attention is one of shallow connection, of never quite being anywhere fully. You can choose differently. You can put the phone down. You can give someone your full attention. And that choice creates a different reality for both of you. The practice of presence is simple but not easy. It requires setting aside your own agenda, your own need to be heard or understood, and genuinely opening to another. It requires tolerating silence, allowing pauses, not rushing to fill every gap with words. It requires vulnerability, because when you're truly present, you're affected by what you encounter. You let another's experience touch you. The natural world offers parallel realities that modern life often obscures. When you're in nature, really in it, attending to it, you enter a reality that's slower, more cyclical, more connected. Trees don't rush. Rivers don't worry. There's a wisdom in natural rhythms that human culture has largely lost. You don't need wilderness to access this. A park works, a garden, even a single plant that you tend with attention. The practice is the same, slowing down, noticing, allowing yourself to be part of something larger than your individual concerns. Nature operates on different timescales than human life. A tree might live hundreds of years. Mountains form over millions. When you connect with these larger rhythms, your own concerns find proportion. Biophilia is the term for humans' innate tendency to seek connection with nature and other life forms. This isn't romantic sentimentality. It's evolutionary wisdom. Humans evolved in natural environments, and our nervous systems are calibrated to them. Time in nature reliably reduces stress, improves mood, enhances creativity, and promotes healing. The parallel reality you enter in natural settings is one your body recognizes as home. Music creates instant parallel realities. A song can shift your entire emotional state in minutes. This is why people use music therapeutically, to access states that are otherwise difficult to reach. You can be intentional about this. When you're stuck in a heavy reality, you might choose music that gently lifts you. When you're scattered, music that grounds you. Music bypasses the thinking mind and speaks directly to emotion, to memory, to the body. A particular song can transport you instantly to another time, another place, another version of yourself. This is why music is so powerful in ritual, in ceremony, in celebration. It creates shared emotional realities, synchronizes groups, facilitates collective experiences that transcend individual perception. Movement, too. Dance, exercise, any form of physical engagement can shift you out of mental loops into bodily presence. Your thinking mind might be stuck, but your body knows how to move, how to express, how to release. The parallel reality of embodiment is one where you're not just in your head but fully alive in your whole being. When you're caught in rumination, thinking the same thoughts in circles, movement interrupts the pattern. You can't think your way out of overthinking, but you can move your way out. A walk, a run, a dance, even just stretching, all of these bring you back into your body, back into the present, back into a reality that's more immediate and less abstract. Silence is a parallel reality most people rarely experience. True silence, not just absence of noise, but absence of mental chatter. In silence, you discover what's underneath all the doing and thinking. It can be uncomfortable at first. The mind rebels against silence, but if you stay with it, silence reveals a depth that's always been there, just covered over by activity. You can create small pockets of silence in daily life. A few minutes in the morning before the day begins, a walk without headphones, a meal eaten in quiet. These small practices gradually shift your baseline, making silence more accessible, less threatening. In silence, you hear what's true underneath all the noise. The parallel reality you're moving toward isn't perfect. It's not a place where nothing ever hurts or goes wrong. It's a reality where you're more resilient, more flexible, more able to meet difficulty without being destroyed by it. It's a reality where joy is more available because you're not constantly defending against pain. This is sustainable. The fantasy of perfect happiness isn't, but a life where you can hold both joy and sorrow, where you can be with whatever arises with some degree of grace. This is possible. This is the parallel reality that awareness creates. Not escape from difficulty, but capacity to be with it, to learn from it, to let it shape you without breaking you. Your suffering isn't all your fault. Some of it comes from circumstances beyond your control, from systems that are unjust, from losses that are genuine and profound. The parallel reality of awareness doesn't erase these, but it does change your relationship to them. You're not helpless. You're not powerless. You have agency in how you meet what life brings. This agency isn't about positive thinking or self-blame. It's about recognizing the space between stimulus and response. In that space is freedom. You can't always control what happens, but you can influence how you respond. And that influence creates your lived reality. Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps, wrote about this. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Community matters. The parallel reality of isolation is painful. Humans are social creatures. We need connection, belonging, recognition. When you find your people, when you're part of something larger than yourself, life takes on different meaning. You're not just surviving, you're contributing. You're part of a web of mutual support. This doesn't mean you need constant socializing. It means you need genuine connection, which can be with just a few people. Quality over quantity, depth over breadth. The parallel reality of true belonging is worth seeking, worth protecting. It's one of the most reliable sources of well-being, more important than wealth or status or achievement. Loneliness has been called an epidemic in modern societies. Despite being more connected technologically than ever, people report feeling more isolated. This is because connection isn't about proximity or communication frequency. It's about being seen, being known, being accepted. You can have 1,000 social media connections and still feel utterly alone. Or you can have a few deep relationships and feel completely held. Meaning is constructed. There's no inherent meaning to life. This could be depressing, but it's actually liberating. You get to decide what your life means. You get to choose what you value, what you work toward, what you stand for. The parallel reality you create through these choices is uniquely yours. Some people find meaning in service, in making others' lives better. Some find it in creativity, in bringing new things into existence. Some find it in learning and understanding and growth. There's no right answer. The question is what calls to you, what makes you feel alive, what you want to be about. Your answer might change over time. That's fine. Meaning isn't fixed. It evolves as you do. Viktor Frankl wrote about 3 sources of meaning: creating something or doing something meaningful, experiencing something or encountering someone, and the attitude we take toward unavoidable suffering. Even when circumstances are terrible, when choice is minimal, we can still choose how we relate to our situation. And that choice, that attitude, can be a source of meaning and dignity. Death is the ultimate parallel reality, one we'll all enter. Awareness of death can be morbid, or it can be clarifying. It can help you distinguish what matters from what doesn't. When you remember that time is finite, you might spend it differently. You might take fewer things for granted. You might say the important things instead of waiting. This isn't about morbid obsession. It's about letting mortality inform your choices, give weight and urgency to what you value. The parallel reality of death awareness is one where life becomes more vivid, more precious, more real. The Stoic philosophers practiced memento mori, remember you will die, not to be depressed, but to be motivated to live fully while you can. Rest is a parallel reality that productivity culture devalues. But rest isn't laziness. It's restoration. It's the necessary complement to activity. When you allow yourself real rest, not guilty rest but deep permission to do nothing, you enter a reality where your worth isn't tied to output. This can be revolutionary in a culture that measures value by productivity. To simply be, without justifying your existence through achievement, is radical, and it's necessary for well-being. You can't push constantly without breaking. The parallel reality of rest is one where you remember you're a human being, not a human doing. Rest includes sleep, but it's also more than sleep. It's allowing your nervous system to settle. It's giving your mind a break from problem solving. It's creating space for integration, for the subconscious processing that happens when you're not actively directing attention. Many creative insights come during rest, when the executive mind relaxes its grip and deeper connections can surface. The parallel reality of enough is one most people never reach. There's always more to want, more to achieve, more to acquire. But what if you're already enough? What if what you have is already enough? Not settling, not giving up on growth, but recognizing sufficiency alongside aspiration. This balance is delicate. You can want to grow while appreciating where you are. You can work toward goals while not making your happiness conditional on reaching them. The parallel reality of enough is one where you're not constantly chasing, not constantly feeling deficient. You can rest in the present while moving toward the future. The hedonic treadmill is a well-documented psychological phenomenon. When you achieve a goal or acquire something you wanted, you experience a temporary boost in happiness. But you quickly adapt to the new normal, and happiness returns to baseline. Then you set your sights on the next thing. This cycle never ends through acquisition. It only ends through recognition of enough. Wisdom traditions across cultures point toward these parallel realities. Meditation, contemplation, prayer, these practices are technologies for shifting perception. They're not just spiritual bypassing or escapism. They're sophisticated methods for working with consciousness, for accessing states that support well-being. You don't need to adopt any particular tradition, but you might explore practices that resonate, that help you access states you want more of. The wisdom is available. The methods are available. What's needed is willingness to practice, to make the time, to prioritize this kind of growth. Different traditions emphasize different aspects. Buddhism focuses on awareness and compassion, Taoism on naturalness and flow, Stoicism on virtue and acceptance, Christianity on love and grace. But they all point toward similar shifts in consciousness. The parallel reality you've been sensing is real. It's not imagination. It's a genuine shift in how you're constructing experience. And the more you understand how this works, the more choice you have. You're not victim to your perceptions. You're a participant in creating them. This understanding is empowering. It means change is possible. It means you're not stuck. The reality you're in now isn't the only one available. There are other ways to see, other ways to be, other ways to meet life. The question isn't whether change is possible. The question is which changes you want to cultivate, which realities you want to strengthen. The shifts don't have to be dramatic. Often the most profound changes are subtle, almost imperceptible at first. You just notice one day that you're responding differently, feeling steadier, accessing calm more readily. That's when you know the practice is working. That's when you realize you've gradually entered a different reality, not through force but through consistent, gentle attention. Patience is important. You can't force these shifts. You can't demand that awareness produce immediate results. It's more like planting seeds. You do the work, you create the conditions, and then you trust the process. The growth happens in its own time. You can't make a seed sprout faster by pulling on it. You can only provide good soil, water, and sunlight, then wait. Trust itself is a parallel reality. When you trust life, trust yourself, trust the unfolding, you're in a very different state than when you're controlling, grasping, forcing. Trust doesn't mean passivity. It means confident engagement, knowing that you can handle what comes. It means recognizing that even difficulties contain gifts, even failures hold lessons. This trust builds gradually through experience. Each time you meet difficulty and survive, each time you take a risk and it works out, each time you let go and discover you're okay, trust deepens. And as trust deepens, the reality you inhabit becomes more spacious, less constricted by fear. You're not constantly bracing for the next disaster. You're open to whatever comes. The parallel reality isn't elsewhere. It's here, available in this moment. The shift doesn't require dramatic life changes. It requires attention, awareness, willingness to see differently. You don't need to go anywhere. You don't need to become someone else. You simply need to notice what's already here, what's always been here beneath the layers of conditioning and habit. You've already begun. By engaging with this, by being curious about perception and reality, you're already practicing. You're already more aware than you were. And that awareness will continue to work on you, below conscious notice, gradually shifting your baseline. Like water shaping stone, gentle, consistent attention creates profound changes over time. When you notice the shift has happened, don't be surprised. Don't question it, just appreciate it. You've entered a parallel reality, one you constructed through attention and intention. You can return here whenever you choose. This isn't a one-time event. It's a skill you're developing, a muscle you're strengthening. Each time you choose awareness over automaticity, you make the choice easier next time. The work is never finished. There's always more to discover, more to release, more to understand. But that's not a burden. It's an invitation. Life is an ongoing exploration, an endless becoming. The parallel reality you're moving toward is one where you're fully engaged in that exploration, fully alive to possibility. There's no arrival point, no final destination. There's only the journey and the quality of presence you bring to it. So rest now. Let these words settle. Let your mind quiet. Let your body soften. You don't need to hold on to anything. You don't need to figure anything out. Just be here in this moment exactly as you are. Notice the breath moving in and out. Notice the sounds around you. Notice the feeling of your body resting. This is it. This is the parallel reality, not somewhere else. Right here. And tomorrow, notice. Notice what feels different. Notice what's shifted. Notice the small ways you respond with more space, more patience, more presence. Notice the moments when you catch yourself before falling into old patterns. Notice the reality you're creating with each choice, each breath, each moment of awareness. You're not alone in this. Countless others are engaged in the same work, the same exploration. You're part of a larger movement toward consciousness, toward awareness, toward more skillful ways of being. Every person who chooses to wake up, to pay attention, to live more consciously, contributes to a collective shift. Your personal transformation is part of something larger. The invitation stands. The door is open. The parallel reality is waiting. All you need to do is notice. All you need to do is pay attention. All you need to do is be present with what is. Not forcing, not straining, just gently, consistently choosing awareness over automaticity, presence over habit, curiosity over assumption. And in that presence, everything changes. Not because the world is different, but because you are. You're seeing with new eyes, hearing with new ears, experiencing life through a more open, more spacious, more compassionate lens. The parallel reality was always here. You're just finally noticing it. You're finally home. Welcome to the parallel reality. You've always been creating it. Now you're doing so consciously. And that makes all the difference. That's where freedom lives. That's where peace resides. That's where you discover that you're not trapped in one fixed reality but moving fluidly between infinite possibilities, choosing moment by moment which one to inhabit, which one to strengthen, which one to offer to the world. Rest now, breathe deeply, let go completely. The parallel reality is not something to achieve. It's something to notice. It's already here. It's always been here. You're simply learning to see it, to feel it, to live from it. And with each moment of recognition, it becomes more real, more stable, more available. Welcome home.